button if you wish to speak. And of course, when you enter the queue, your microphone will indicate on my screen and I will then call you to speak. At this point, I was going to say that apparently there are gremlins in the system which have manifested itself over the last few weeks, not least of which was in the council meeting here, I think on the 19th of December. So if we do have problems with the microphones, it is expected, so please bear with us. On that basis then, we'll begin the formal agenda. So, could I have a notification of any apologies for absence, please, Helen?
Chair, you have no apologies. You have a full house.
Thank you. So I won't ask for substitutes. Turning to the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of December 2025, are there any comments and corrections on the minutes, please? Okay. Could I have a proposer? Councillor London. And a seconder, please. Councillor Miller-Jones. So without correction, could I see a show of hands in favour of approving the minutes? Yeah, okay. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, please.
So that motion is carried and the minutes are approved.
Thank you, Claire. So declarations of interest, and members are reminded of their responsibility to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest, other registerable or non-registerable interest which they have in any item of business on the agenda. And that should be no later than when that item is reached and when appropriate to leave the meeting prior to discussing and voting on the item. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Marmay-White.
Chairman of Ruffin Parish Council, but as I informed the officers, I didn't take part in the meeting where this item was discussed, but I attended in order to answer questions. And the Vice Chairman has followed up with things with a report today. So I will stay for the meeting and take part in the discussion, but I will not take a vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marmay-White. Claire, do you want to comment on that?
Thank you, Councillor Marmay-White. I just wanted to check with the governance officer, but that was all in order. But yes, that's fine, provided you've got an open mind, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Right, then we move to the substantive item on the agenda, which is the land north of Mount Road, Ruffham. And I'll invite the case officer, Dave Beaton, to present his report. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members, and Happy New Year. This application is before the committee following a call in by the ward member, Councillor Sarah Marmay-White. Just by way of general context, but Ruffham with Rushbrook Parish Council object, Bury Town Council recommends approval. The site itself is located within Ruffham Parish, but directly adjoins the Bury Town Council area. The application itself is for up to 160 dwellings, of which 40% will be affordable and 10% will be self-build with associated infrastructure. The application itself is submitted in outline form with all matters reserved apart from the means of primary vehicle access. I will explain what that means as we move through the plans. Firstly, I'm just going to start with some updates. So we've received two further representations since the publication of the committee report, one from the Morton Hall and Eastgate Residents Association, which raises the following summarised points, that the proposal severely impact on the Mount Road section of Morton Hall, which is already a bottleneck, that it would increase traffic on Eastgate Street, which is often a standstill at busy times, and that it would add pressure to the oversubscribed GP surgery and pharmacy. We've also received a further representation this morning from the resident of Barton Grange on Mount Road, which again raises the following points. They note that from their house, we need to walk in the road to reach any of the pedestrian pavements along Mount Road. and they have expressed serious concerns that without an extension of the speed restriction and additional pavements along Mount Road, that the increased traffic will be a risk. They have suggested the signage directing vehicles to the A14 at the Lady Miriam Way roundabout would reduce traffic. I also have one slight change recommended to condition 18. This is with the addition of the words in red being added. This change simply relates to the provision of carriageways and footways and includes a connection to the existing network, not just those within the site. My understanding is this change is consistent with recently agreed standard wording, for example, in relation to, I believe, the recently considered Stanton application. I will be coming back to this slide later on in the presentation, but just wanted to start here because I believe this is helpful in setting the immediate and wider context of the site. So we can see the application site generally in the centre of the slide here, and just to give you an update on the general site context, we can see the A14 running east-west in the south of this slide. We can see Rougham Tower Avenue, again running generally in an east-west direction to the south of the site. We can see Lady and Miriam Way, which runs in a north-south direction to the southwest of the site. Immediately south on the other side of Mount Road is the former Rougham Airfield site. And again, we can also see the Ely to Ipswich railway line running again east-west along the northern boundary of the site. And then on the northern side of the railway line, we can see the Bury northeast allocation, indication of the country parks associated with that development. And then further off to the north and to the east, we can see Great Barton Church here with the settlement village of Great Barton, again further north off the top of this slide. And again now the site itself, as we can see, generally rectangular, and aligned to the east of the existing residential development in Moreton Hall. As I explained on the previous slide, to the north we can see the railway line running east-west immediately along the northern boundary of the site. And again, as I've explained, the site itself is within the parish of Rougham with Rushbrook, but the boundary of the parish runs generally along the western boundary of the site, so that housing to the west is within the Bury St Edmunds Town Council area. I'm just going to take you, before I enter the presentation proper, on a photographic tour of the site. I will start close to the western boundary and then we'll move generally in a clockwise direction around the site. So again, just to give context, we can see the plan on the right-hand side of all of these slides gives a general indication of the location in which the photograph was taken and the direction in which it was facing. So this is taken from within the existing residential development to the west of the site, within Moreton Hall, and on the end of a road known as Seeley Road, which is looking into the site. So the site is beyond this knee rail. Again, moving slightly closer to the site, but again, off-site to the western boundary of the site. Again, we can see the existing residential development within Moreton Hall. We can see the shared footway and cycleway that runs along the western boundary of the site. We see the low-level landscaping, and then along the rear boundary where the horizon sits is the railway line, again, which runs along the northern boundary of the site. So now we're moving into the very northwestern corner, the top left, if you will, of the site itself, and now we're looking back south along the western boundary. So this is the shared footway and cycleway. This flank wall on the right-hand side of the image is a detached outbuilding, a garage associated with one of the existing dwellings within the Seeley Road area, and the site itself is on the left. The rear here, this line of trees and vegetation is on the far side, the south side of Mount Road within the former airfield site. So we now move into the very far northwestern corner of the site. Again, looking into the site, we can see the railway line runs behind this hedge and low vegetation along the northern boundary of the site. And again, just from that northwest corner, the railway line on the left, the trees along the south side of Mount Road on the far right of this site. this image, and it gives us an idea of the general nature and character of the site, which is generally flat, although it falls ever so lightly towards its southwestern corner and is currently in open agricultural use with limited natural vegetation other than around its extreme boundaries. A useful image that just gives an idea of the relationship to the railway line. We can see that the railway line taken at this point, which is in the far northwest corner of the site, is ever so slightly elevated, and that what gappy vegetation does exist towards the northwestern corner of the site recedes as you move along that northern boundary. And again, this is a view from the very far northeastern corner, looking down along the eastern boundary of the site. We can see the existing vegetation within the Rougham Airfield site, and we can see the very sporadic hedging along the eastern boundary of the site. We now move to the very far southeastern corner of the site, and we're looking back, and you can see in the background here, you can see the existing development within Seeley Road and Morton Hall, which frames the western boundary of the site. We can see this more substantial vegetation, which is on the other side of Mount Road, and this limited hedging in the far southeastern corner of the site. Again, this gives a good impression of the general vastness, the scale and the flatness of the site itself. This is a view from a very similar location, but now further along the Mount Road frontage on the southern boundary of the site. Just gives you an indication of the existing, much more established boundary hedging and tree line that runs along the eastern boundary of the site. The railway line is in the back of the site here, and the hedging tends to become more significant as it gets closer to the Mount Road frontage. And again, as we're moving around the site, we're now moving along the southern boundary, along Mount Road, which is the road on the left-hand side of this image. Again, we can see that the site frontage is generally open along Mount Road, and that the significant tree specimens are on the south side of Mount Road, outside of the site. Again, we can see the existing residential dwellings within Morton Hall in the background here. Just to note, and I will come back to this point later in the presentation, but it's helpful just to visualise these at this point. A tree survey has been undertaken by the applicant of those off-site trees, one of which has been categorised as a veteran tree, another of which has been categorised as an ancient tree, both of which have very significant levels of protection within the NPPF, and both of which have root protection areas, buffer zones, as they're known for trees of this nature, which actually extend below and across Mount Road and into the site. And I'll just explain why that is important when I come on to the highways drawings. So this is the point of access. Again, we're now looking back east along the site frontage. This is the eastern boundary of the site, and this, of course, is Mount Road. And now, having done almost an entire circuit of the site, you can see from the plan, we're now in the very southwestern corner of the site. Again, we can see the frontage buildings within the Seeley Road, Morton Hall area, the shared footway and cycleway, and again, the very far southwestern corner of the site. Just a couple more images just to give you a little bit of context. But again, this is a picture taken, again, right in the very southwest corner of the site, at the end of the shared footway and cycleway. It just gives you an idea of the prevailing character, in particular the setback from the back edge of the pavement along Mount Road. And again, another one, just looking from the same spot. This is the flank of that garage, but just looking back along Mount Road, the site itself is behind this advertisement board. I've got one image, video, which I hope I can get to work. It worked every time I tried this. No, it's stubbornly deciding that it doesn't want to play. Does anyone know how to make this play? No. Okay. We've got a good idea of the site from the videos, and with my apologies, I've road tested this multiple times, and it worked every single time, and now the play button has disappeared, so bear with me. If it's crucial and we need to come back to this, then we can do so. Oh, there you go, it's working. More by luck than judgment. So this just gives an idea of the size and nature of the site, and pans round generally back towards Mount Road. Good. I'm afraid I don't know how I made that work, but I'm pleased that it did. So turning to the format itself of the presentation, I'm going to focus on the key areas on the slide itself. But of course, this is a focused presentation to be considered in conjunction with the detail within the report that is before you today. So I'm going to start with policy and principles. Of course, that's important given the allocation, but also given the number of dwellings proposed. I will move on to key matters, including access and highway, sustainable connections, suitable alternative natural green space, what we call SANG, and public open space. I'll touch on ecology, arboricultural impacts, Section 106, and then, of course, conclude with a summary and a planning balance. So in terms of the issue of principle, the site is an allocated site. It's allocated under policy AP7 of the 2025 West Suffolk Local Plan. It's allocated for around 120 homes. Obviously, members will note the application before us is for 160. The reasons expressed in the report, a proposal for this number of dwellings is considered to fall within the scope of this policy requirement. But of course, the rationale behind this conclusion, I will now explain in more detail. And again, just to highlight some of the key elements within the relevant policy allocation itself, particular points to note are the expectation of a minimum 25-metre buffer along the northern boundary, the railway boundary, from both an amenity and a landscape perspective, and also a minimum 15-metre buffer to the eastern boundary, again from a landscape perspective. The policy requires a significant extent of green and blue infrastructure, plus sustainable travel connections. And again, this is very crucial, and this is the case with all of our residential allocations, but the development must mitigate its effects on the Breckland SPA and SAC, and adverse effects in relation to the effect on those areas typically arise through increased visitor pressure. And part of the strategy to address these impacts is through the provision of what's called SANG, suitable alternative natural green space on site, which seeks to offer convenient local opportunities for quality informal recreation in an effort to minimise as much as possible the visitor impacts within these sensitive areas. So turning to the matters before us, and as I explained at the outset, this is an application which is in outline only and with only access for consideration. So all other matters are reserved. They will be subject to further applications if this matter is approved. And for the purposes of this application, access means simply the main vehicular access off Mount Road. All of the details provided to support the application are indicative. Access typically would include all of the areas of pedestrian and vehicular movement within a site. In this case, access is limited solely to the direct access off Mount Road. So reflecting on the policy principles, and the application has been supported, is supported by an illustrative drawing. What I mean by illustrative is it is here to guide and to offer reassurance, but it is not formally before us as a drawing that will be formally determined as part of this application. Nonetheless, it's not just helpful. In my view, it is essential in order to give us as the local authority the comfort we need that all of the matters that are important to us, the matters that I've explained in the policy, are capable of being brought forward through an acceptable reserved matters application. So to note in relation to what this plan shows, but it shows the required buffers to both the north and the east, and also the hedge along Mount Road to the south of the site. The plan identifies sustainable travel connections through the site and off-site, including through the western boundary. Members will note from the report that the land along the western boundary within the Taylor Wimpey site is to be adopted by West Suffolk Council, and that ensuring that we are able to provide connections through that site is absolutely essential, and that a Section 106 agreement contribution has been included, which allows for the funds necessary to complete those connections. In relation to the layout itself, the site identifies the correct typologies of public open space. It identifies a sufficient quantum and quality of suitable alternative natural green space. There is a specific formula that calculates the amount of space that is required based on the number of dwellings and based on likely occupancy. This plan demonstrates that that is capable of being provided. And again, satisfying the relevant provisions and requirements and level of SANG is fundamental to the acceptability of any residential scheme. As I've explained, the proposal indicates a minimum of 3.1 hectares of SANG, sufficient to offset any recreational effects. Members will note, and it is important to highlight this point, that the conclusion on acceptability of the quantum and quality of the suitable alternative natural green space is based on the premise that the SUDS basins will be multifunctional areas of open space integrated into the layout and the landscaping, and that the provision of deep or fenced or overly engineered features will not otherwise be acceptable through any reserved matters application. And that's one of the reasons why the proposal is very specifically expressed as an up-to figure, because ensuring all of these policy requirements are met and that the SUDS basins are multifunctional is fundamental to the acceptability of the proposal, not just from a landscape and from an urban design perspective, but also, of course, in relation to the effect upon the Breckland SPA and SAC. Ultimately, again, of course, because this is an outline application, these are matters that will be addressed in detail at any reserved matter stage. But officers do have comfort that because this is a habitat regulations matter, if wider, broader, shallower SUDS basins are found to be required at the reserved matter stage, then it will be the number of dwellings that will be sacrificed, not the extent of suitable alternative natural green space. So the outcome thereafter, in feeling satisfied that all of these matters that can be provided, is that the developable area at 160 dwellings would provide a density around 36 dwellings per hectare. So members will note in the detail within the report explaining why officers consider that this is in principle an acceptable density for a development of this nature in this particular location. Of course, seeking to sometimes strike a very careful balance between the requirements to make effective use of land, to provide all of the matters that policy AP7 expects, whilst also, of course, providing an appropriate design, an appropriate layout, and of course an acceptable standard of amenity to all existing and future residents. It is, of course, it is largely contextual, but I have made this point within the report, but all applications, of course, must be considered on their own merits. But in reaching a judgment on this particular point in relation to the density, officers are mindful that the Planning Inspectorate, in allowing the appeal at Bury West late last year, considered that a density of 42 dwellings per hectare would be acceptable within and around Bury St Edmunds. So reflecting on the issue of policy and principles, and of course, and this is crucial, subject to further detailed consideration at the reserved matter stage, officers are satisfied as a matter of principle that a development of this nature, including for up to 160 dwellings, can be brought forward while satisfying all of the requirements of policy AP7. Turning to the matters that are before us. Now, as I've explained, the matter of access is for consideration. And this is a drawing that gives an idea, an indication of the access arrangements onto the site. This is a parameter plan which is for consideration, which shows in very general terms the position of the road crossings. It shows that in general terms the position of the highway's access, and it indicates the position of pedestrian and active travel connections through the boundaries of the site. And then turning to the very, very specific, more technical detail of the application before us. But this is the plan which shows the matters of access that are formally before us for consideration. This includes, again, we can see on the drawing here, this includes the entrance and the first few metres of the access, plus the pavement and cycleway, a short section in either direction. All of the drawings, beyond the one on the screen and the preceding slide, are for illustrative purposes only. So, as I have explained, these further details are provided on an indicative basis, but are nonetheless useful in demonstrating how the access arrangements may come forward, and a condition is considered reasonable to provide measures generally in accordance with these particular details. Just to highlight, on the top plan, on the left-hand side, these show the Toucan crossing to the very southwest corner of the site. They show the speed restriction markers at the far eastern end of the site towards Sow Lane, and they show the crossing point to the east and the central crossing and bus stop. The condition, you will note, relating to the bus stop offers some flexibility on the timings for its delivery to be agreed if necessary, in order that its location best reflects the form of development coming forward on the south side of Mount Road. Again, for context, but members may note the Rougham Airfield site is allocated for, I believe, 500 dwellings and the position of any bus stops along Mount Road will need to reflect whatever comes forward as part of that. Just to note on this plan as well, members can see on the right-hand side of the top image and the left-hand side of the bottom image, these are the same root protection areas. They're just replicated across both drawings, but they give you an idea. The red lines show the extent of the veteran tree and ancient tree buffers which extend into the site and which have required the reorientation of the pedestrian and cycleway along the southern boundary of the site. Members will note the conclusions in relation to the effect on highway safety and the view of the Suffolk County Council as local highway authority, including no objections made by that organisation. Suffolk County Council have considered this matter with reference to any future predicted increase in traffic in combination with the Rougham Airfield development. Just while I continue in relation to highway-related matters, but this plan on the screen shows the indicative footpath improvement works that have been secured, or would be secured, I beg your pardon, in relation to the northern section of Sow Lane. I am intending to come on to the wider sustainable connections, and so we'll elaborate in more detail on this on a future slide. But to note that the County Council has raised no objection to these works, and also that the works themselves to the boundary of Sow Lane can be provided without detriment to the adjacent high-value trees, again, which I'll just show you on the next slide. So we've got an image from Sow Lane looking south towards the roundabout with Rougham Tower Avenue. This just gives an indication of the nature and width of the carriageway along Sow Lane, the levels along that on that verge, which are at a higher level than the level of the carriageway, and the position of the high-value trees here on the right-hand side, which means that a wider, formally surfaced footpath is not possible within the space within the highway. And then just a further view further along Sow Lane, and what this shows is the pedestrian footpath via the finger post sign on the other side, opposite side of Sow Lane, which runs into the Rougham estate, and it is a connection to this off-road path, which is the prime motivatory factor in securing the improvement work to Sow Lane. Again, just to note, a financial contribution is secured to replace a number of stiles with accessible gates within the Rougham estate. So, concluding on the matters of highway, and in light of the view of both Highways England and that of Suffolk County Council as local highway authority, and with, of course, these improvements secured through condition and through the Section 106, the highway-related implications of this can be considered acceptable. So, turning to some of the further matters of detail within this application, and I touched briefly on the matter of SANG and the effect of development through increased recreational visitor pressure on sensitive locations. And our policy within the local plan that establishes the framework for resolving these issues is SP11, which seeks to provide mitigation measures which are designed to protect these sites, not just across the district, but also elsewhere. And it requires that new development which would result in a net increase in dwellings and is likely to increase recreational pressure on any European site to be required to demonstrate that adequate measures are put in place to avoid or to mitigate these potential adverse effects. In general terms, these mitigation measures take two forms. Firstly, typically a payment, which is known as a RAMS, Recreational Avoidance Mitigation Strategy payment, which is used to mitigate for visitor effects in sensitive locations. There's a standard tariff per dwelling, which is then typically used to improve conditions within sensitive locations. That may be footpath improvement works, it may be signage, it may be dog litter bins, it may be the cost of rangers. In this case, the applicant has agreed to the requested payment and it would be secured through the Section 106 agreement. Secondly, and again, I've mentioned this acronym previously and probably will so again, Suitable Alternative Natural Green Space, known as SANG, which is the open space of a sufficient quality and quantity. And the aim of SANG is to draw some visitor pressure away from sensitive areas, in particular informal access and dog walking, which can lead to degradation of footpaths, nutrient enrichment through dog fouling, and general adverse impacts. And the provision of SANG is designed to offer some alternative opportunities for informal recreation without needing to increase pressure on sensitive areas. So to support the application, we have got an indicative, again, indicative, it is illustrative, not formally for part of this application, but it does show how the site can come forward, providing a sufficient quantum of both public open space in accordance with our Appendix J, is it J? Appendix J in our local plan, and a sufficient quantum of suitable alternative natural green space. Again, as explained, we need a minimum of 3 hectares of suitable alternative natural green space on this site in order to, of a suitable size and of course also a suitable quality in order to offset its effects. What this plan shows and the following plan is that we show how this quantum of SANG could be achieved and how the various typologies of open space required within a local plan can also be achieved. And this includes circular dog walking areas, it includes an off-lead dog walking area, and of course it includes, and this is crucial, off-site connectivity to wider active travel and open space areas. Ooh. Going the wrong way, do beg your pardon. And then we also have an indicative SANG parameter plan. And again, this is just a note, this is illustrative, but in order to be acceptable, it relies on the SUDS basins being accessible and multifunctional. And that's in direct accordance with both the policy SP2 and SP4, both of which expect SUDS basins to be multifunctional and integrated within the layout of schemes. Offsetting the recreational effects, excuse me, it also relies on sites being part of wider well-connected locations, making sure that sites offer ready active travel access to any existing open spaces, to any existing rural routes is essential in ensuring that a sustainable development is brought forward, and of course essential, fundamental in fact, in ensuring that the recreational effects on the Breckland SPA and SAC are managed. Again, this is required as part of policy AP7, which requires sustainable travel connections to be provided. So the plan on the screen, which you may recognise from earlier in the presentation, shows how the site links in its southwestern corner to existing off-site active travel connections. National Cycleway 51 runs east-west along the southern side of Mount Road. National Cycleway 13 runs north-south down towards Sybil Andrews Academy, and then further north across the railway line and onwards. An active travel connection through this southwestern corner and through the the west side of the site are absolutely essential. On the other side of the railway line, via at present and at grade crossing of the railway line, lies the country park that will be provided as part of the now implemented Bury Northeast development. Again, we can see existing connections that run to the south from generally in the southwestern corner of the site down towards Sybil Andrews and Skylanner Way. We can see existing connections that run down and towards Lady Miriam Way, where some existing local facilities, including Sainsbury's, exist. And of course, we can see the existing rights of way network that currently provides the Sustrans owned and operated cycle and pedestrian route along the southern side of Mount Road, which ends very, very close to the junction of Sow Lane and Mount Road, and then extends off to the east via existing footpaths within the wider area. This plan also highlights, I think usefully, how important improving connectivity along Sow Lane in particular is. Anyone, members who may be familiar with Sow Lane will know that the verge is significantly degraded as a consequence of informal pedestrian use along Sow Lane. And whilst officers only feel that completing an element of this, what I've called in the report a missing link, is justified as part of this development, it is important to note, crucial to note, that this is a joined up matter. It isn't going to be considered in isolation, and that the development of the Rougham Airfield site will not only seek to complete that missing link along the southern section of Sow Lane from the point where close to the pedestrian access into the Rougham estate and to then to the roundabout at Rougham Tower Avenue. But what the Rougham Airfield site will also seek to do, of course, and essentially will provide its own sustainable and active travel connections through the site. Again, it's a block on permeability to the south at the moment. Occupants from this site will either travel to the west or to the east if they are to access the Suffolk Business Park and some of the facilities at the A14 junction, for example, the McDonald's and the petrol filling station and local shop. Again, wanted to make sure that members had this point in their mind. Members will note that there is an objection set out to this development from Network Rail. It objects on the basis of an increased pedestrian use of the at-grade Cattershall crossing and the safety effects arising from that. In considering this matter, officers do note that Network Rail didn't seek to comment on either of the consultations as part of the then emerging, now adopted local plan and the allocation. That was obviously on the basis of this scheme being for 120. At that point, it is now before us at 140. So there plainly is an increase over and above the level of development that Network Rail elected not to object to. And the increased safety risk of users of the crossing is acknowledged, and it is a matter that weighs gently against this proposal. What is important to note, what is essential to note, in fact, is that there is a mechanism in place in a timely manner to secure the closure and replacement of this crossing. When I explain the Country Park and Bury North East, members may note that has the benefit of what's called a hybrid planning permission. So it has around about 300 homes that are approved in full and around about 900, I'm approximating here, that are subject to future reserve matters. Excuse me. We are in the process of considering discharge of conditions, and that application has been implemented. So we are content that it is like to come forward in a very timely manner. To note, but there is an existing former agricultural underpass that exists under the railway line further to the west of this crossing, which is currently closed and not accessible. It is a conditional requirement of the Bury North East development that that underpass is opened prior to the very first occupation of any of the dwellings within the Bury North East site, which will offer. At that point, the crossing will remain, but there will be a generally reasonably accessible alternative for those who choose not to use the crossing for safety or other personal reasons. And there is also a conditional requirement on Bury North East that prior to the occupation of the 500th dwelling, that the crossing is closed and replaced with a footbridge. As I explained, there is a mechanism in place that will ensure, I believe, in a timely manner, that there will be suitable alternatives for the crossing in the initial period, and then a replacement for that crossing in the not too near distant future. So, as I explained, while any increased public safety risk in the meantime, pending the formal closure of the crossing, is a matter that does weigh against the proposal, officers are satisfied this doesn't come anywhere close as a matter of balance to justifying a recommendation of refusal. Turning to biodiversity and ecology-related matters, again, the authority has a duty under the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act to have regard to, in all of the exercise of its functions, to the purpose of conserving and enhancing biodiversity. The habitat value of the site is generally low. We will have seen the images. It is an arable site with limited soft landscaping features other than around its extreme boundaries, and is otherwise therefore generally low in terms of its biodiversity value. We do have, nonetheless, and importantly, a number of conditions recommended to secure ecological mitigation, a construction environmental management plan, enhancements, lighting design. And the information provided to support this application provides certainty that the likely impacts on designated sites, protected priority species and habitats, with, of course, appropriate mitigation and through conditions, can be made acceptable. The development must also deliver 10% measurable BNG. Information provided with the application shows that there are proposed BNG enhancements that are considered achievable and acceptable in principle and are in excess of the 10% requirement. Turning to the Section 106 and the heads of terms, and the applicant has also agreed a package of Section 106 contributions required to make the development acceptable in planning terms. These measures are set out on the table on the slide and, of course, are within the report before you today. And these include what is necessary to offset the effects arising from this development. Amongst these, and I think to note in particular, are a contribution requested by the NHS to increase capacity at Mount Farm Surgery, along with what I'm sure members are familiar, but otherwise standard contributions relating to education, waste, libraries, built leisure facilities, and of course biodiversity. These are adequate and necessary in order to meet the needs of the development, including necessary infrastructure, and also that they are still compliant as set out in the report. So the detail before us demonstrates how this proposal is considered acceptable in principle, notwithstanding the increase in dwelling numbers over and above the allocation. It does also offer sufficient comfort that a well-designed, accessible and permeable layout can be brought forward with sufficient open space to satisfy its own needs, plus offset any adverse effects on the Breckland SPA and SAC. And officers are satisfied that the principle of development is therefore considered acceptable. Again, just to note, final slide before you, in terms of a planning balance, members will note the report and plans and as set out in the presentation, the many benefits arising from the development, including the efficient delivery, I use the word efficient deliberately, of housing, including 40% affordable housing and 10% custom and self-build plots, the enhanced public rights of way connectivity, including the improvements to Sow Lane, and the improved access within the Rougham estate to the east and through the western boundary of the site, linking and connecting this site to the emerging country park in Bury North East. We also have the provision of extensive green infrastructure, including on-site public open space, and of course, SANG, suitable alternative natural green space, and associated biodiversity enhancements. On the other side of the planning balance, and again, just to note and respect, members will note the objection from Network Rail that I have highlighted on the basis of the increased safety risks associated with an increase in dwelling numbers and users of the at-grade Cattershall rail crossing. As I say, for the reasons I've explained, this is a short-term matter until the underpass and bridge are provided, which I say are both requirements of the already commenced development of the land on the northeast of the railway line, northeast of Bury St Edmunds. So noting all of the matters in favour of development, the application is recommended for approval with conditions which are set out in the report before you, and of course the amendment that I've made to condition 18 is part of this presentation and subject to the finalised section 106 package. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dave. So we turn our attention, can you hear me now? As a matter of fact, you can, okay. We turn our attention to our registered speakers. We have an objector, Andy McGowan, your Vice Chair of Moreton Hall and Eastgate Residents Association. Look, I'll just read out the other names and I'll call you in, Andy, okay. Then we've got the Vice Chairman of Rushbrook and Rushbrook with Rougham Parish Council. That's Councillor Jeff Horner, who's submitted a written statement, which Helen will read out on behalf of Jeff. We've got the committee member, Councillor Marmo White, but she is the ward member for Rougham. So she's registered to speak. And we've got William Page on behalf of the Pigeon, the applicant. Nice to see you. Okay, there's slightly extended speaking arrangements on this because 2 wards were consulted, so I've got a bit of flexibility around that. But Andy, you've got up to 6 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. So whilst I acknowledge this development is one contained within the local plan, we would oppose the number of houses on this development exceeding the figure set out in the plan of around 120, which has already been discussed, and in particular exceeding it by more than 30%. And this is because of objections relating to the necessary infrastructure, particularly focusing on health, education and travel. In regarding to health, the application suggests that this development can be serviced by existing GP surgery capacity. But when determining the capacity, there are still another 52 homes being completed currently on the Taylor Wimpey site, and it's unclear to us from the health impact assessment if this has been factored into calculations, because in the transport assessment, it specifically states that both the Taylor Wimpey and Great Barton schemes were analysed, but no such assurance can be found in the health impact assessment. It's also concerning that contrasting the approaches between those 2 assessments, the health impact assessment makes no reference to the scale of the proposed development of Rougham Airfield, which is another allocated site in the local plan, which will obviously place extreme capacity pressures on local health infrastructure. Specifically in relation to GP surgeries, the health impact assessment argues that it should factor in trainee GPs into capacity because are all currently level 3. But our argument is if that were to change and the trainees be level 1 or level 2, that would require a greater level of supervision and so reduce the availability of capacity for the fully qualified GPs as well. If we use the fully qualified GPs to patient ratio without taking into account any other developments that might come, that would result in a ratio of 1 GP to 1,813 residents, which is over the recommended ratio of 1,800. in relation to pharmacies, the health impact assessment contained no reference at all to pharmacy capacity, which we find concerning, given that Moulton Hall has seen a 72% decrease in pharmacy provision in the past 3 years, at the same time that the new homes on the Taylor Wimpey site have continued to be completed and occupied. Previously, we had 141 hours of pharmacy provision in Moulton Hall, but following the closure of the Sainsbury's pharmacy in June 2023 and Croasdale's decision last year to reduce by 10 hours a week, that has now reduced down to 40 hours of pharmacy provision. And so this development would place even greater pressures on the existing pharmacy that is there. Croasdale's had to reduce their hours because of having to employ more staff to manage the increasing workload. But the challenge is that the government reimbursement for medicines often does not cover the cost of supplying them. And so the concern is that by having even more residents needing to use that pharmacy, actually, even despite the national changes to pharmacy funding, that would see an even greater funding in terms of shortfall for the existing pharmacy as well, placing even greater pressure on its sustainability. In relation to education, the health impact assessment says it will need 45 primary school places. When you look at Abbots Green, it says in the assessment that that is oversubscribed and so has no capacity. It also says that Seabrook Wood has only 18 available places, and Great Barton Church of England Primary Academy has 10. This would leave a shortfall of 17 places, meaning that 38% of children coming from this site would have to travel 2.5 miles to their nearest primary schools. And so one of the questions we raise is, if those primary age pupils are under 8, that would then result in Suffolk County Council being liable to cover the cost of transporting these children to school. But it's not clear whether this is being considered in terms of the impact of this development. Similarly, the IHT guidance for acceptable journeys to be made on foot, referenced in the transport assessment, states that 2,000 metres or 1.243 miles is the preferred maximum journey length on foot for the purpose of school. This would therefore mean that all of the 45 children would likely require the use of a vehicle to get to and from school, adding to the congestion levels. And we are already seeing significant safety concerns around both Abbots Green School and Seabrook Wood at drop-off and pick-up time, with cars already parking on the verges and having near misses in terms of accidents. Despite this travel requirement to the schools is not mentioned in the travel assessment nor the air quality assessment. The travel assessment lists Abbots Green as the nearest school, but the health impact assessment says the school is significantly oversubscribed, and so these two assessments appear to contradict each other. If Abbots Green did have space for more pupils, then using that guidance I mentioned previously, that would mean that in terms of actually the distance would still exceed both the desirable and acceptable maximum distance for journeys on foot, leading to a significant chance of journeys being made by car, something which is really highlighted in our Big Listen survey about the impact on congestion and safety on our roads as well. And finally, in terms of around travel, there are concerns about the impact on Mount Road, both in terms of volume of traffic, but also safety with increased volume of vehicles. Using the calculations in the assessment, 160 homes would mean an additional 256 vehicles using the surrounding roads. And that represents a 33% increase in the number of vehicles compared with 120 homes. So given the current bus provision does not operate in the evenings or on a Sunday, there would still need to be a significant reliance on cars. And so we'd like to know what assessment has also been made about the impact of the development on the Eastgate ward in respect of the usage of Mount Road to get into Bury St Edmunds as well. And whilst the proposed extension of the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit would improve safety, data from the town council further down Mount Road that showed even where there's a 30-mile-an-hour limit, the 85% quintile speed still exceeded the 30-mile-per-hour speed limit there. So in conclusion, for these reasons, we'd like to sort of raise our objections and say that if it is approved, we'd ask that any Section 106 contributions should reflect the increased impact of 160 homes compared to what would have been in place for 120. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, Andy. Right, the statement that Helen will read out is on behalf of Jeff Horner, who is the Vice Chairman of Rushbrook and Ruthven Parish Council. Over to you, Helen.
The Parish Council understands the need for housing, and with the increase from 120 to 160 dwellings, it should be supported by good infrastructure. The Parish Council recognises the proposal fails to understand the requirement for good infrastructure and links given the location of the proposal. The proposal is introducing additional traffic onto Mount Road, which is a country lane not designed for such volumes of traffic. The junction at Sow Lane/Mount Road has recently had a number of accidents for which the development will need to recognise. This junction should be reassessed for capacity, geometry and safety, with the cumulative effect from development outside the parish, and this additional development should not be granted until full assessment and improvements proposed. The proposed footway link from the site to the existing prow along Sow Lane is inadequate and substandard. It encourages pedestrian movement along a narrow footway adjacent a narrow carriageway, which is a safety concern. There appears to be more space available on the east side of Sow Lane, but this has not been utilised. A segregated cycle provision is proposed to link to the existing cycle route on the south side of Mount Road, but there is also a proposal to introduce cyclists onto Mount Road at the edge of the site and near to a proposed narrowing and poor realignment of the carriageway, again a safety concern. The proposed drainage for the site is based on infiltration at deep depth, raising a concern for the potential for contaminating the town's drinking water supply. Also, the long-term maintenance and potential consequence of failure of this system could lead to the flooding of Mount Road. The provision of green infrastructure has not been justified in meeting the 40% requirement. As this development is at the extremities of the development plan, then it needs to integrate better within the surrounding countryside. The provision of services is lacking, particularly for health facilities. The Mount Road surgery is 1.2 miles from the site and is already at capacity. The developer promotes above average life expectancies for the area, but to maintain this will require more health facilities. If the committee is minded to approve this application, then the Parish Council will accept the decision, but look to the committee to secure the vital infrastructure required.
Thank you very much indeed, Helen. So, Councillor Mildmay-White, in your capacity as ward member, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that this application site is an allocated site within the local plan, and no one disputes the need for housing. However, this site was designated for 120 houses in the local plan. The proposed increase of 30% to 160 houses and the obvious urbanising effect of the site in the open countryside is at odds with the large detached houses to the east fronting Mount Road. The plans do not give sufficient integration with this street scene or of the landscape coalescing with the open countryside. How often have members sat in meetings discussing place shaping and creating communities? In my view, we're now losing sight of that ambition for our new developments. This Mount Road development is an example of the worst kind of ribbon development. Where will residents living here really feel they belong? How connected to any community will the residents be? The site sits in open countryside within Ruffham Parish, leading out from Morton Hall along Mount Road. It's 2.6 miles and a 5-minute drive from the centre of Ruffham, 2.9 miles and a 6-minute drive from the centre of Thurston, but 4 miles and 12 minutes, if you're lucky, drive from the centre of Bury St Edmunds. Can this further development abutting Morton Hall, but in Ruffham Parish, really be considered to be part of Bury St Edmunds? The proposed entrance is too close to the driveway of the property opposite, known as the Wallow. The road bends here, and the Wallow has poor visibility coming out of their drive. I have concerns that cars leaving the new development will not give due consideration to this entrance. In addition, what is to stop walkers and cyclists using their driveway as a shortcut to the cycle path? Concerns around infrastructure once again come to the fore, with cumulative impact of this and other large developments along Mount Road in Thurston. We cannot continue to look at each development in isolation, particularly here with cross-border developments. Thurston's population is now 6,000, an 86% increase since the 2011 census, with more developments in the pipeline. This has a major impact on traffic using Mount Road and the surrounding roads through Ruffham. Of particular concern is the junction with Sow Lane, which is now the main route to the A14, and to have a cycle crossing path just yards from this busy junction is now unacceptable. If a toucan crossing is deemed necessary for a crossing from this development to the cycleway across Mount Road, then surely it must be a given that the same should apply at this junction, where cyclists from this development, amongst others, have to cross back over Mount Road. The Sow Lane junction and I have to say that the clue is in the name, Sow and Lane, is now suboptimal for the amount of traffic using it, with no lighting and poor signage. I call upon Suffolk Highways to conduct a full review of traffic movements on Mount Road, particularly regarding travel to and from schools and health services, and obviously the impact on the surrounding roads as well. Recent developments at Lark Grange and Thurston are putting pressure on our health service, as you've heard, and as stated in the HIA, it falls short of fully addressing our local health needs. And the report is very light on education issues, particularly post-16 education and school travel, which would have to be to Thurston or this area. If the committee is minded to approve this application, there is substantial work to be completed at the reserved matters stage to address all the issues highlighted by Moreton Hall residents and Rougham residents regarding infrastructure. I would expect both parties to be fully involved in ongoing discussions around these issues. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Marmee-White. And finally, we've got William, and you've got your 6-minute slot.
Thank you, Chair and members, for the opportunity to address you this morning. My name is William Page, and I'm Pigeon's Planning Manager with responsibility for this scheme. I'm joined by Pigeon's Technical Director, Ryan Bruty, who is responsible for the site's technical matters, such as its highways and drainage strategy. Our application seeks outline planning permission for a high-quality landscape and design-led scheme that will create a new, sustainable extension to Bury St Edmunds on a site allocated for residential development in the adopted West Suffolk local plan. This proposal has been developed over time throughout the local plan and application processes, with ongoing engagement between the applicant and officers to ensure it aligns with policy and local objectives for Bury St Edmunds. I would like to acknowledge the constructive and thorough work undertaken by officers in assessing the application. The recommendation before members reflects that process, and we fully and wholeheartedly endorse their positive recommendation for approval. The application will deliver significant local benefits, which have been worked up following engagement with the local community. These include delivery of new homes in a highly sustainable location at the built edge of Bury, benefiting from excellent access to services, employment opportunities, schools and established walking and cycling routes, reducing reliance on private car journeys. 40% affordable housing will be provided to help local families stay local, alongside 10% custom self-built plots to meet identified local demand, as well as over 40% of the site is green infrastructure, including public open space and children's play areas. The development will also secure on-site suitable alternative natural green space, or SANG, as the case officer mentioned earlier, and it will provide improved pedestrian connectivity with footway connections to the Lark Grange development to the west, the existing off-road cycle path along Mount Road, and footway improvements along Sow Lane, all strengthening access into the wider public right-of-way network, as well as surrounding villages. A comprehensive Section 106 package with financial contributions totalling over £2.5 million has been agreed in principle to address the impacts of the development. This includes contributions towards early years, primary and secondary education, as well as healthcare, transport and active travel improvements, biodiversity monitoring and the long-term management of green infrastructure. The development will also improve biodiversity on the site by at least 10%. The application seeks permission for up to 160 new homes and is accompanied by a framework master plan, landscape master plan and parameter plans that illustrate how this quantum of development can be accommodated as part of a high-quality landscape and design-led scheme. 160 dwellings equates to a density of approximately 36 dwellings per hectare, which is consistent with the character and form of the adjacent Lark Grange development, wider Bury St Edmunds, and crucially, it allows the site to meet all of its relevant policy requirements. As confirmed in your officer's report, this quantum of development can be accommodated on the site without undermining the objectives of the allocation. Furthermore, all new homes will include a dwelling-centric, fabric-first approach which locks in carbon savings for the life of the building. Further carbon savings through building-centric renewable energy technologies will be achieved through further carbon savings such as solar panels and air source heat pumps. Provision will be made for access to electric vehicle charging for all homes in safe and accessible locations, and all homes will include water-saving measures. So to conclude, land to the north of Mount Road will provide a high-quality, landscape and design-led sustainable new neighbourhood for Bury St Edmunds with an extensive package of benefits, all of which will provide a long-lasting positive contribution to the town. Extensive discussions have been had with the council and the local community, resulting in a scheme that is attractive, deliverable, and environmentally responsible, reflecting a collaborative and plan-led approach to bringing this site forward. We are committed to working with the council to secure the timely delivery of the site, which is free from constraints to the need for any significant enabling infrastructure. For those reasons, we respectfully invite the committee to accept the officer's recommendation to grant outline planning permission. This is a great opportunity to deliver much needed homes and a real public benefit on a site long recognised as suitable, which we hope you will support. Thank you for your consideration, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions that members may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, William. Committee, I'm just proposing a short recess. So if you wanted to use the facilities before we go on to the debate, I would suggest probably 10 past 11. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, we'll restart the committee meeting, and just before we go into the committee debate, I'm going to ask Claire just to make a comment about Councillor Mildmay White, who's left the committee.
Thank you, Chair. So upon receipt of legal advice, Councillor Mildmay White has chosen to leave the meeting in order to preserve the integrity of decision-making process.
Thank you, Claire. Right, so we move on now to the committee debate. Just before we do that, we did invite County Highways to attend. Just before Councillor Glossop asks the question. She does every time. But it was only because of a personal matter that Peter Bradfield, who we're very used to seeing in the committee, who couldn't get here today. So there shouldn't really be much in the way of serious, complex highway questions. But anyway, okay, so we move on now. So cue to speak, press your microphone. Members, if you wish to speak, please. Someone, please. Councillor Sayer, please.
Thank you, Chair. My only concern really is the relationship between the very good cycle path that goes down on the opposite side of Mount Road to this development, and how people from the site would access this path, this cycle path that goes all the way along to the Sow Lane junction. Somebody did mention that they thought their driveway was going to be used for people to get onto this path. Having crossed onto that path and go all the way up to the Sow Lane junction, this is my main concern, is that it is quite a busy junction. Have we got any data for the accidents that are supposed to have happened here? It is very busy. And then, of course, the cycleway that comes here and will join up with the footpath going down Sow Lane, the cycleway actually then crosses over and up onto the north side of Mount Lane again, going into Thurston. So it's people coming in from Thurston on that cycleway that would then cross Mount Lane to get onto the cycle line going south there. So it's the whole relationship of that junction, and I don't know what the data is relating to that junction. I would be far happier if the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit went beyond the southeast corner of the site and went beyond that junction, so that traffic is slowed all the way along that section. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sayer. Councillor Hood, please. Oh, no, you think you've just turned yourself off.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. I have some questions, probably bizarrely, on the archaeology, and I would like the planning officer just to clarify some things, because having gone through the paragraphs, archaeology and heritage, paragraphs 222 to 227, and then kind of tried to marry them up, which on page 130 with the comments there. I'm perhaps a bit jaundiced about developers' cavalier, in my view, approach to archaeology. So, and I'd really like to be reassured that despite what I consider conflicting comments on page 122 and 123, you know, the developer talks about a desk-based archaeology assessment, concluding there are no designated heritage assets, which then when you go to 224, in contrast, Suffolk County Archaeological Services identifies the site as lying within an area of high archaeological potential. So there's a complete dichotomy, which we'd have to have been born yesterday not to feel that this is a standard way that some developers approach things. Anyway, I don't want to bore everybody by going through the whole thing, but when you get to the recommendations for the what's got to be done archaeologically, if one takes Suffolk County Council, who I'd say don't have a vested interest in their approach, this is an area of high archaeological potential. Their consultation response highlights evidence of nearby investigations which have revealed Bronze Age activity, Iron Age settlement, Roman enclosure, burials, medieval Green Age settlement features, in blah blah, Saxon burials. You know, they say we should secure a proper program of archaeological evaluation and mitigation. And I get that the planning officer is trying to secure that, but actually I don't think some of this language, when you get to page 130, is a bit, if I can say this, woolly. And I would like reassurance. And just as an example, the words must or may seem to be mixed up with the words shall, which is the imperative, which I think should be used throughout. And when you get to page 131, paragraph 7, completion of archaeological evaluation, it says no building shall be occupied until the site investigation, etc., has been completed. But there's a huge difference between building before the proper investigation has been completed and occupying. So I find that a bit counterintuitive. And I could go on. I think I've probably gone on long enough for everybody, but I am concerned, and I really think we need proper reassurance that the developer is going to be held to the highest standards acceptable because of the statements from the Suffolk County Council Archaeological Services about high archaeological provision. So if that could be answered. One other just practical question. I'm a bit confused about this Toucan crossing, and it strikes me that the traffic, you know, I think it's very disappointing that Peter Bradfield or someone from Suffolk County Council isn't here. But perhaps I'll leave that to others. I'm focusing on the archaeological stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hood. Councillor London, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd also like to echo disappointment that we don't have anyone from Highways here. And I'm very thankful that Peter Bradfield usually is able to make time. I understand that he has personal commitments today, but surely County Highways is not a one-man band, and it does seem to be falling quite squarely on Peter's rather broad shoulders to be here. I'd like to say thank you very much for officers for making sure that we have a tremendous amount of green space in this development, and the suds not just being holes in the ground. That's a fantastic improvement over other spaces, and also thank you for adding in those extra words to connect footpaths in. I do have some thoughts, concerns, in no particular order. Can we confirm, is Network Rail a statutory or non-statutory consultee? And do we know that their objection, having come in after the initial allocation for 120 on this site for 160, is specifically due to that 40 house increase, or do we think that it might have just been that they missed the opportunity to talk to the local plan, and that was possibly an error, or do we know that that is specifically due to the increase? Also on that increase, I think the word around is doing some really heavy lifting here. It's a 1/3% increase. You know, if I said, I'll charge you 120 quid for something, and then it turned out to be 180 quid, and I said, well, it's around that, you'd probably raise an eyebrow. And I'd just like to confirm, is it those SUDS alterations that are enabling that 1/3 increase? And if so, can we absolutely confirm that we're not going to be in a situation where the 1/3 increase in housing is allowed, and then subsequently it's decided that the SUDS alterations are too onerous and that we go back to the holes in the ground, if that makes sense? Next point, Residents Association on page 89 and in person made a whole list of questions, which I will not go through here. However, I am very interested to know the answers to those questions that were raised. On page 89 as well, the Residents Association makes what I think is a very reasonable request, which is calls for ongoing engagement with the Resident Association if permission is granted. We have done that with other sites, and I'm wondering whether we can somehow work into this, that the Residents Association, if planning is granted, do continue to have access at a suitably senior level. And then I've got a couple of other little ones. On page 141, there's a really weird terminology used that I have no idea what it means in air source heat pumps. 35, any air source heat pump units will be mounted with proprietary anti-vibration isolators. I'm wondering why proprietary? And the reason I'm asking this is, and this is no shade on any specific developer in the room or outside of it, but I am aware of one developer who has used specific air source heat pumps that require specific parts to be used, and those specific parts can only be used by a partner organisation and are ridiculously expensive. So I want to make sure that this is not an additional funding stream, if that makes sense, to use proprietary parts rather than generically available parts, because otherwise I can't see why that word proprietary is there. And finally, on page 134, point 15, the headline kind of doesn't say the same thing as the rest of it for this condition. EV charging points, all dwellings. Prior to first occupation, all dwellings with off-street parking should be provided with an operational electric charge point. This does seem to open up the possibility that our residents who are in social housing, which often suffer with on-street parking rather than private parking, won't be able to access electrical charge points. This is really important because we have more than usual people in that kind of housing that use mobility vehicles, and mobility vehicles, some types of mobility vehicle are now only available as the electric option. They have discontinued internal combustion engine versions. And we do have some situations that are happening where residents are unable to charge their cars because the parking was not next to the house. And what I'm concerned at is that this is going to actually provide a financial incentive to make sure that social housing is provided with on-street parking rather than off-street parking. And I'd like to make sure that our percentage of on and off-street parking is the same between owner-occupied and social housing to prevent that from happening, if there is any way to do that. And then I'm aware that we have £2.5 million worth of S106. It does seem rather low in certain places, though. We've got 15k for footpaths off the site. That's not really going to produce what has been produced in the outline drawings. That is roughly 9 homes, by the way. 2.5 million at market value for this development, and I'm just wondering if we can confirm is that going to be index linked, and what happens if when this comes forwards to a full application and we have more houses come through at that point, because we've seen that, will we also see a percentage increase in the S106? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor London. I've got 3 councillors which I'm going to take and then go to officers. That's Councillor Thorndyke, excuse me, and that's me, not the microphone, by the way. That's Councillor Thorndyke, Councillor David Smith and Councillor Glossop, and then I'll go to officers. Councillor Thorndyke, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick points. The Parish Council, I noticed, complain about healthcare and the facility being at capacity. NHS are going to put in some 92k into the pot for this, but is it like Stanton where there is no space to grow the existing surgery? Or is there capacity on the Mount Road surgery for it to be grown to take another 2 consulting rooms? Or are we looking again at an amount of money from the NHS being an absolute waste of time because you can't achieve anything with it. I'm a bit concerned about the leap on the northern side of this site. It seems awfully close to the railway. I hope that all the fencing around there is going to be maintained in a childproof condition, because railways have a fascination. Even today, I must admit the impact has gone, but today they're still an attractive thing for kids, and I'd hate for anything to happen along there. The other bit is the conditions 30 and 31, sound attenuation and vibration. I notice the sound attenuation stipulates that it's got to be less than 30 dB in the bedrooms with the windows open. The question here is, what happens if they don't match that? Have they then got to do a rebuild and stick some fixed ventilation in after the people have moved into the houses? I just don't see how they're going to achieve 30 dB on bedroom windows that are facing the railway line, unless, of course, they're going to stop all the trains between 11 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the morning. And bearing in mind that Ely Junction is going to, at some stage, be improved, and there are going to be more goods trains running on that line, because that's the aim, is to get more goods on that line. And that is the noisy traffic. Passenger traffic these days ain't so bad, but the goods traffic is horrendous still. And I just wonder how on earth it's going to be achieved with that, and the same goes for the vibration. Goods trains are renowned for vibration. I used to live next to a railway. I have some experience in the dim and distant past of that. So that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thorndyke. Councillor David Smith, please.
Thanks, Chair. Not too much to add to that, really. I feel that this application will probably be approved. I can't see too many reasons for not approving it, but it does concern me the increase in the number of dwellings, as it's been said, by about a third. The wording up to always worries me as well, because we know with developers, they'll take that as a target rather than a limit, won't they? It's a bit like speed limits. People drive to think that 60 mile an hour is the target to drive at rather than the limit. But yeah, that does concern me, that we are getting into overdevelopment of this site, and the capacity is being stretched to the limit. One other point is, on some of the maps there, you show a leap to the south of the site. Can you tell me that, is that part of the application as sort of the Sang, or is that part of the other development on the airfield site? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor David Smith. Councillor Susan Glossop.
Thank you. I'd like to ask, it's up to 160 houses. What is the timescale for the delivery of all these houses? Because we've heard today from the parish councils about their concerns about the schools and not having capacity, but it's well documented now that we're not even replacing ourselves now. So therefore, have we taken into account, we probably won't want so many, if you call them junior schools or primary schools or any schools, over the next 10 years, because, we won't have the young people. So I'd like that question answered, whether that's been factored into the figures for schools, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Glossop. And as promised, over to Dave and Penny.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to go through the notes that I've made. I hope in the order in which they were made. Penny may wish, of course, to jump in if I've missed anything. So, Councillor Hood requested reassurance in relation to what were felt to be conflicting comments in relation to archaeology. With a view that the applicant had downplayed the issue, and that the County Council's Archaeological Service had reflected the significance of the issue. Ultimately, that is the output. The County Council, in its role as Archaeological Service, has considered that the information submitted by the applicant is sufficient to enable an outline planning permission to be granted. but is not at this point sufficient to enable development to take place, hence the conditions that they have recommended as set out on conditions 5, 6, and of course condition 7. And they have recommended those conditions at their discretion because of their belief of the potential significance of the site from an archaeological perspective. And these are their standard recommended conditions that they believe will mitigate, investigate and manage any archaeological remains that may choose to exist on site. Just a further clarification on condition 7 as well. I know, Councillor Hood, you made the point that it would be too late if they'd already started work if there was a trigger. Now, just to note, the condition under number 7 relates to the provision being made prior to occupation for the analysis, publication and dissemination of results and archive deposition. So the trigger in relation to that condition is not the works themselves in relation to any groundworks that might be necessary. It is the provision that is then subsequently made for reporting, archiving, analysis of any finds on the site itself. So I hope that offers some reassurance that these are standard conditions recommended by the Archaeological Service. Councillor London raised some comments in relation to Network Rail. My understanding is they are a non-statutory consultee. I think you made a question, and I'll be honest, I don't know the answer to that, but is there objection due to the 40 dwelling increase, or is it because they missed the previous consultation? I simply don't know. They didn't articulate that. Taking it with a very straight bat, and assessing it on an objective basis, the obvious conclusion is that they chose not to object to the previous ones, but have objected on the basis of the increase. But I don't know whether that's their rationale or not. You mentioned the numbers being, I think the term you used was doing some heavy lifting in terms of the word around. I actually, my own view is that I approach this from the other end of the telescope, and that the numbers are never the starting point, but the numbers are the outputs from an analysis of what the site can accommodate, based principally in the public interest on what the policy requires. So the level of open space that is necessary, the standoffs and buffers that are necessary, the level of SANG, and SANG is of fundamental importance. SANG is a habitats regulations issue. If there is any concern that the development or any development will have an adverse effect on the integrity, the regulations direct that permission must be refused. Now, the habitats regulations apply at the reserve matter stage. So again, coming on to your issue, your point in relation to SANG and the basins, if a sufficient level of SANG, suitable alternative natural green space, is not provided, i.e. multifunctional, accessible spaces, then it calls significantly into question whether the habitats regulations assessment will be satisfied, and therefore whether we are in fact able in law to approve a reserve matters application. So we do have that additional comfort. It isn't just the fact that we've got policies that say that this should be provided. We have got the habitats regulations assessment that say that it is essential in order to offset any adverse effect on integrity. So it gives me great professional comfort. I hope it does members as well. I think there were, you mentioned the comments of, sorry, I'm stepping away from the microphone, the comments provided by the Residents Association, and I think just some view of officers' response in relation to those. And just as an aside, of course, the Residents Association will be consulted on any reserve matters application and able to be involved at that point. I had printed their comments out. Here we are. Sorry, I do beg your pardon, Councillor. Is it the comments of the Parish Council or the Residents Association?
Mainly the Residents.
It was the Residents Association. I haven't got those. Did you print those out, Penny? Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Penny. Condition 35, what does proprietary mean? I'll be completely honest at this point. This is a condition recommended by our Public Health and Housing team. It is I don't like to use this word, but I will. It is a standard condition that has been regularly and routinely used in circumstances of this nature without, it seems, apparent issue or misunderstanding. So that's perhaps as much reassurance as I can give you in relation to that at this point. Condition 15, Councillor London, you made the point in relation to EV charging. Again, this is a reserve matter, but all dwellings will have parking in accordance with the standards. The condition in relation to condition 15 requires all dwellings that have off-street parking, which all will, in accordance with standards, to have an EV charging point. Again, it's a common principle that social housing units, affordable housing units, should be indistinguishable from market units, both in terms of their form, in terms of their size, etc. So the condition, we believe, is appropriate to ensure that that will be the case. You mentioned the contribution of £15,000 towards off-site improvement works. Just to clarify, the £15,000 figure is very specifically requested by our leisure services manager in order to provide the 3 off-site connections through our land, West Suffolk Council on land on the western boundary of the site. That's to ensure essential connections through that boundary and onward to the existing active travel footpath and, of course, beyond to the country park, which will come forward as part of the Bury North East development. Other works within the highway, can be conditioned and will be required to be provided as part of the applicant's Section 278 obligations and funded by the applicant in conjunction with the Highway Authority. It can't be more than 160, just as a point of legal principle. The proposal is for up to 160 dwellings. The applicant wants to promote more than 160 on the site. Well, I'll have to go through the application process again. You mentioned comments about the healthcare and the... Oh, sorry, beg your pardon, I moved on to Councillor Thorndyke. Beg your pardon, Councillor London. Councillor Thorndyke raised questions about the NHS and the capital contribution that has been sought. We do know that the Suffolk and North Essex or North East Essex Integrated Care Board have done their own health impact assessment. They have said that in their consultation response, and they have requested, in their judgment, a capital contribution of around about £92,000, which in their opinion will be sufficient to offset these effects. I can't say any more than that, other than that they have been consulted directly on the application. They have undertaken their own assessment. This is what they have asked for, and this is what is provided in the Section 106. Councillor Thorndyke also raised comments in relation to the relationship to the railway line. Again, there has been, the evolution of this site, of course, reflects the requirement to offset the northern boundary. The policy AP7 requires a minimum of 25 metres to some degree from an acoustic and from a vibration perspective. The application does and is supported by technical reports that are to the satisfaction of our public health and housing colleagues, albeit they have recommended, as you'll see, conditions 30, 31, and also condition 32, which relates to a post-completion noise assessment. Plainly, much of the work that supports this application is done on a technical but theoretical basis, inevitably, because building form, boundary treatments, window position, building orientation is not known at this point, but it offers, in the opinion of the Public Health and Housing team, sufficient comfort that the site can be brought forward in an acceptable manner. You will note the caveats that I've included embedded within our report that relate to boundary treatments, the effect of noise on the effect of any boundary bunding or fencing that might be required, and the effect that that will have from an urban design perspective, from an amenity perspective. Ultimately, this is why this is expressed as an up to. If a development comes forward that has fencing that is unacceptable from an amenity perspective, that is too close to the railway line from an acoustic perspective, then the reports will analyse that at the point when the reserve matters come forward. And if the consequence is the scheme has to be moved back from the railway line in order to satisfy at the reserve matter stage, that again is why this is expressed as an up to. So again, certainly from the view that I've reached and expressed in the report and as supported by Environmental Health and Housing, we are satisfied that the acoustic environment and the vibration effects on the site from the railway line can be considered acceptable through any reserve matters. And then I believe Councillor David Smith raised concerns about the numbers and in relation to overdevelopment. I'll just reiterate the point I made in response to Councillor London. The numbers are never the starting point from my perspective. They are the consequence of a careful analysis of site capacity. They are a consequence of understanding exactly what the policy needs and what the policy expects and ensuring that we have comfort that that can be brought forward. Only when we have that comfort, only when we know that the boundary to the northern railway line can be respected, that the buffer to the eastern boundary can be respected, that suitable open space of a sufficient typology and quantum can be provided. Only when we know that a sufficient amount of suitable alternative natural green space can be provided do we know what the developable area is. And then on the basis of having gone through that process, we've got a developable area that 160 brings the scheme forward at about 36 dwellings per hectare, which certainly, in our view, balancing all of the matters before us, we feel is an appropriate density, not least noting the view of the planning inspectorate, of course, on Bury West. And then I think my final note was Councillor Glossop in terms of timescales for delivery. I don't know. Ultimately, this is a scheme which is supported, sought by an applicant who typically would look to then sell the site to then otherwise be brought forward at the reserve matter stage by another party. We know that those reserve matters need to be submitted within 3 years, and we then know that there are then 2 years from the approval of those reserve matters for implementation. Beyond that, it is outside of our control. Thank you. As it happens, I have got some brief accident data figures. I'm not an expert on these, of course. Oh, I do beg your pardon, sorry.
Councillor Say, you were waving at me, which is most unusual.
Finish, but he,
he's
spoken to him now and he's going to do.
Yes, he reminded himself, or Penny reminded himself.
Excellent.
He was coming back on.
Thank you, Councillor.
Just to say, there were rather a lot of questions packed into that short bit of a debate, but between us, hopefully we'll have captured them all. I've still got a few bits that I think we need to come back on, so just hold tight for the moment. If you feel like you've got a question that you haven't heard the answer to, just bear with us a few moments. We'll pick up on the sort of loose ends, and then I'm not promising we will have still picked up on everything, but by all means at that point, please do hail us down and we'll pick it up. But bear with us one moment.
Thank you, Penny, and with my apologies, Councillor Sayer, I've been suitably metaphorically kicked under the table to to bring myself back to this. As it happens, and just for my own benefit, I did review some of the what we call the crash map data relating to this site. Now, I'm not an expert on this. Obviously, the Harbor Authority aren't here, but it nonetheless does, I hope, offer some reflection on the wider position. So I think I've got 4 slides, I believe, in no particular order, but the one on the screen, it is visible, yes. This shows, and the data runs from 1999 to the present day. I think actually it relates to 2024 is the most recent data, but it's a spread of around about 26 different years. So this shows Mount Road, if you can see, running east-west, the junction of Sow Lane. What this shows are what are called or termed as serious accidents. I don't know what that terminology relates to. The terminology comes in 3 terms. It comes as what are called slight, then it's serious, and then fatal. So the red exclamation marks on the screen are the data relating to serious accidents over the last 27 years. What we can see is that there is was one fatal recorded accident within the vicinity of the site, if we can see here, just to the east of Sow Lane. I've just got to pop up. This is the slight accident data. The slides got a little bit busy if I try to include all of them at the same time. So this is the slight accident data. My understanding is slight is a vehicle collision, but that which doesn't include any injury. So there is a gentle cluster of some vehicular accidents along Mount Road and at the junction with Sow Lane. But of course, 6 over a period of 26 years must be seen in wider context. And that's where I'm going to just take you with the next 2 plans. Again, just to give you an idea, and again, this is just the general area and much of the A14 and Bury St Edmunds. And I think that the takeaway I took from this is that there is nothing unusual about Mount Road or Sow Lane beyond day-to-day accidents that do happen. I say this is a 25, 26-year reflection of accident data. Whether there are any hotspots is a matter of judgment, but it just gives you a general idea that this doesn't seem, in my professional view, albeit not as a highway officer, to feel like there is a cluster of accidents happening in this particular location. And again, just to give you another sense of that, but this is the slightly wider area in terms of slight accident data. And again, as would be expected, given the number of vehicles over the number of years, there are areas where accidents have taken place along Mount Road, Ortwell Road, junction of Skyline Way, etc. None in my own view, which is above and beyond what might otherwise be expected. I hope that's helpful, and I think I'll just pass over to Penny if you've got anything else, Penny.
Not in relation to that point, but just picking up on some of the other questions and also going back to pick up on the questions of the Residents Association. So there's a couple of other questions that relate to Councillor London. One of them was just in relation to EV charge points, and then that distinction about off-street parking, and then the concern about affordable housing provision and how we might look at that parking. Just as a general point, we're also aware of some problems in terms of affordable housing and when they have off-site, off-plot, but still off-road parking, and then the sort of commuted charges that then relate to any kind of electric vehicle charging. So we are working with our colleagues in the strategic housing team so that when we look at reserved matters applications, we can work as well as we can to try and design out those things. So hopefully that will give you some comfort. We are aware of those knock-on effects that perhaps aren't directly applicable to planning, but have real-world consequences. You also queried the Section 106 figures in terms of what they look like as a package and how much they are. People love to say, oh, it's this much million, or it's actually, it's about whether or not they're enough to mitigate the harms that have been identified. They are index linked, and they are all informed by the relevant consultees in terms of it being the sufficient quantum to deliver the required mitigation or additional things to serve the development. In respect of the points raised by the Residents Association, and I'll probably throw this back to Dave as well to assist with, I'm working from my own notes, the key points that were made just now as a speaker. I haven't got their written comments in front of me. I'm aware that there were lots of questions really embedded within it, but to me there were really kind of three key themes in terms of their questions, and all of which related to the provision of infrastructure. So there were some questions there about health infrastructure in terms of the capacity, particularly relating to very detailed things about the type of GP provision, and there were also some questions about the impact on pharmacy provision. There were questions in terms of education, the availability of school places, and then the knock-on effect that that might have in terms of the distance children may need to travel to primary schools. And there were some general points looking in depth in terms of the health impact assessment that came with the application and what they saw as some of the tensions between that and other reports, and indeed sort of the reality as they see it on the ground. So I think, Dave, you'll probably, you've got some answers to those those matters, I think, and then there's a couple of other questions as well we need to just pick up on.
Thank you, Penny. Yes, and I have now found my notes in relation to the Residents Association. Again, this is just repeating comments that I have previously made. But like I've said, and the NHS ICB has undertaken their own health impact assessment of the impacts arising from this proposal, and at their discretion, at their professional discretion, has requested a figure of £92,000 to offset that impact. I'm not an expert in these matters, but again, I trust that having sought their engagement and having received their response, not least noting that they have undertaken their own health impact assessment to assess these effects, they have concluded that those effects will be mitigated through a contribution. Likewise, in terms of increased school capacity, the sum requested by the County Council, my understanding is that it is a capital contribution. The site at Rougham Airfield will include provision for preschool and primary school provision, again, which is likely where the contribution will be spent in terms of bringing forward the provision of that. Again, a joined up approach with the 500 homes that are around 500 homes that are expected on Rougham Airfield. And then I think the other matter was a plea that the Section 106 infrastructure should reflect 160 homes, not 120, and of course it does. The figures, the consultations, and all of the responses received from all of the relevant parties relating to Section 106 contributions are prorated on the basis of the number of dwellings and the effect of those dwellings. And again, the effects, the wider effects that they are responding to are on the basis of 160, not 120. I think that might be it all. Yes, there was indeed. Sorry, thank you. Well done. Access to the site, no, it's not part of this site, Councillor Smith, but it will be brought forward as a coordinated part of the development on the Rougham Airfield, which inevitably, if you note the location of this site, I'll just use the plan in front of us, but if you were looking to access any areas to the south of the Suffolk Business Park, the area around McDonald's, the logical route to do that in time will inevitably be through the Rougham Airfield site, and that the development on that site will ensure a coordinated approach to active travel measures for those key destinations to the south of this site.
Just a couple from me in terms of just clarifying a few points as well. Just to give you some additional comfort, Councillor Hood, in relation to those conditions for the archaeology, the actual work, the trenching work, the wording and the condition that County have recommended is prior to the determination of the reserve matters. So that means that the findings of that could inform a layout if necessary. It gives you haven't laid down and determined the precise positioning layout of properties until you've carried out all the full archaeological assessment of the site, should they find something astonishingly valuable in archaeological terms. Councillor Glossop, in terms of your point about how we look at school places generally and the demand for those, the County Council do have a methodology which does look at things like census data and birth rates. You know, that's updated periodically, and it may well be that over time that's going to change, but that's when Dave mentioned looking at the number of properties and then looking at the sizes of those properties. We use that to then work out what we think the kind of amount of people, the pupil yield, I think is what the county use as a term. So they do take into account that. It's not a fixed thing. It does over time. They do look at reflecting that methodology. So over time that will ebb and flow, and they will also look at the various school uptake in certain areas, because parental choice means that a school that's full at one point can change if there's, it has a different Ofsted review. So it's periodically updated, and the information that they give us is only valid for 6 months. So it doesn't get too out of date. We make sure that we always have an up-to-date position before we determine an application. Just a final clarification for me, and thank you from our legal officer in terms of searching and checking for us in relation to Network Wales. They are indeed a statutory consultee for any application proposing development that is likely to result in a material increase in the volume or a material change in the character of traffic using a crossing. So it doesn't specify vehicular traffic. If we take traffic in its broadest sense, it is right and proper that they are consulted on this application. Now, they flagged a concern. It is for us as a decision maker to then look at that in the overall balance. It isn't necessarily determinative, and we have to look at the context of this application and the known infrastructure provision that we know is going to take place. We also need to look at the context of where that crossing leads to. You don't have to go across it to get to a school in terms of a desire line and where people are likely to be moving and the volumes in which they're moving. Until that Bury North development comes forward and the associated infrastructure with it, like the country park, that is the point at which it becomes more of a destination. And by that point, because of the triggers in the permission that exists for that northern development, there will already have been the reopening of the underpass at a very early stage. And then once you get to the 500th occupation, you'll then have that pedestrian bridge and the closure of the grade crossing. And that is because that development north of the railway line, there are very much destinations that those people will want to get to that involve them crossing the railway line. So that is, the schools, for example, they will all need to go in that direction to get to Sybil Andrews. So we've looked at those concerns, and as officers, we've weighed them in the balance, taking into account that context. But they are a statutory consultee. So just for the record, that is important we set that straight.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Penny. Now, I've got some additional requests to speak, but before we move on, just reflecting Councillor Sayers' concerns, does anybody feel who asked a question initially that they need further clarification on that question, not to ask another question, but just clarification? Councillor London first, and then Councillor Hood. No? Oh, it's just that your microphone is on. Is that to ask it?
Requested to speak, but
Oh, sorry. Councillor Hood.
Yes, just in relation to Toucan Crossing.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard feedback on that.
Would you be so kind as to just repeat the question? Apologies, because I have completely missed that one. But I am aware now that you're saying it, that you asked it, but rather than me try and...
Yes, it has been highlighted and was highlighted in at least one of the submissions that there's this Toucan crossing at Sow Lane, which is described somewhere as being dangerous. And I was wondering if there was some kind of reassurance on that. But of course, I appreciate it's difficult with no Suffolk County Council Highways person being here.
To the best of my knowledge, there isn't a Toucan crossing on Sow Lane, unless it's further south, close to the filling station and McDonald's. Certainly the northern area of Sow Lane. I don't believe there is a Toucan crossing now.
The Sow Lane junction is described as unsafe, particularly due to poor visibility at night. That was...
So I think it's the absence of there's no crossing, there is no formal crossing proposed for Sow Lane, but there is on the southwestern corner of the development. So it's actually, is it a query more about why there wasn't a need for one on that Sow Lane junction and what, when we are requesting one to the western edge? I mean, they are two slightly different types of pedestrian routes. As Dave pointed out in his presentation, there is a desire line more generally to access facilities and services in that southwestern corner as you then start to move down towards the facilities on Lady Miriam Way and the school. And so there is a different nature in terms of the amount of pedestrian traffic and sustainable connections to the east. The Sow Lane crossing is to facilitate the wider access to the countryside, for more recreational purposes. So there is a sort of slight different in terms of the nature of pedestrian traffic, nature and frequency, and that would have informed, I believe, the assessment from our highways officers. Obviously, they're not here to answer that, but it wasn't something that they have requested in their comments on the application.
Sorry, thank you. So also at the top of page 8, there's a highlight about Sow Lane, which they consider not fit for purpose in its present form, especially with the conflict between cycles and cars at this junction. I'm just slightly uneasy if somebody got run over and killed. I'm not clear that that's been dealt with, and I don't know whether maybe it should be, there should be something to clarify or sort that out. So it's just really a question. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hood. Anything to come back on that, Dave?
I mean, again, if we had the Highway Authority here, it would be able to explain the position that it's reached in relation to this. I would just reiterate, I hope helpfully, the point that Penny made, that the principal destinations that are likely to be readily accessible from the site are those which are accessible from the southwestern corner of the site where the proposed Toucan crossing will exist. We've got this north-south existing pedestrian and cycle route which runs down to Sybil Andrews and Skylander Way. Likewise, the vast majority of day-to-day facilities and services are accessible toward the west of the site again, which is likely to direct naturally that movements will go through that southwestern corner. There is inevitably some likelihood that potentially residents on the eastern portion of this site may choose to travel along Mount Road and then may choose to travel south along Sow Lane in order to access potentially some of the facilities in the southeast, for example, the McDonald's and the petrol filling station and associated services there. But even so, the vast majority may choose to do so in a much easier manner along the existing segregated footway and cycleway that runs down to Skyliner Way, that runs down to Rougham Tower Avenue via the Skyliner Leisure Centre, and then of course east along Rougham Tower Avenue, which again has lighting and accessible pedestrian and cycle routes. As Penny has explained, as I've explained, the methodology behind the partial improvements to Sow Lane are to provide pedestrian access to the Rougham Estate, which is an off-road route and which justifies the use of the proposed informally surfaced pedestrian route along Sow Lane, simply because there isn't space within the highway to provide a greater, wider, more formal surface, but also because this represents betterment over the existing situation. Sow Lane is used. Those that are familiar with Sow Lane will know that there is degradation of the verge there, where pedestrians and cyclists are using Sow Lane in order to travel north and south, either to or from Thurston potentially. And this does secure betterment over and above that. Also, of course, and this is fundamental, that there is a joined-up approach here to the development of the Rougham Airfield site, which will unlock sustainable and active travel movements south from this site, through that site, to all but, to most, if not all, of the destinations to the south and to the east of this site, with the only residual one where those may choose to use Sow Lane being those who wish to then access the pedestrian routes, off-road pedestrian routes, into the Rougham Estate. This purple line here hatched on the plan, which does offer a circular walk out towards and through the Rougham Estate and south through Blackthorpe Barn and then back through under the A14. I hope that helps.
I was going to ask if you registered to speak because you're seeking further clarification. Let's get the clarification sorted, and then we can move on to fresh subjects. So over to you, Councillor Hood.
Thank you, Chair. Is it possible to condition a response from the highways in relation to that? Or are we saying, which is what worries me, because there is no county council person here, we're relying on our very experienced planning officer, but who is not a highways person. I mean, are we going to do something or nothing? I would like some kind of added condition, but that may not be acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hood. Penny?
It wouldn't be possible to put a condition asking for comments, and in my view, it wouldn't be appropriate to put a condition asking for an additional crossing above and beyond what highways have requested and agreed in terms of the conditions that they've set out in their formal response to this application. It would be advantageous to hear them articulate the rationale behind their position, but we do have their position in terms of what they considered to be the necessary works to the surrounding highways network, including footways and places where additional crossing points would be needed. So we know what their position is. We don't necessarily have them here to set out a detailed explanation of it, but I don't think it would be appropriate at this stage to add any additional conditions.
Thank you, Penny. Thank you, Councillor Hood. Right, I can move on now to current requests. And I've actually, before I do so, Councillor Neil, you were in the queue, and then you've disappeared. Did you self? Yeah, for some reason you left the queue, so you'll. Okay, you've now got to the bottom of it. We was previously at the top of it, but there you go. That's just life. So I've got Councillor Waldron. Thank you for bearing with us.
Thank you, Chair. It's just my normal bleat. The car spaces for the car parking. Are we still working on the 1964 regulations, or are we actually going to build spaces that cars can park in? Especially now you're talking about electric charging and remote parking. The spaces have got to be bigger. So I'd just like to know if they're going to be bigger or they're going to stick to the regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waldron. Councillor London.
Thank you very much, Chair. I had a couple of things I was going to say, but I just wanted to add one extra thing in relation to what Councillor Hood said, which is entirely sort of separate to the determinations. If it would be possible to ask Highways to provide a written response to the questions to the committee, that would be very much appreciated. I've been fairly forensic with looking through this application, and thank you, officers, for being fairly forensic with your responses. I have to admit, I still have deep misgivings with regards to a statutory consultee saying no. Network Rail are railways are a major transport solution. I would put them at the same level as highways, and I wonder whether we would be quite as comfortable if highways were the statutory consultee saying no, as opposed to Network Rail. However, I do appreciate that we have significant constraints in capacity in a lot of our statutory consultees, and I think that we've managed to come to a local solution to that problem. I think sometimes we need to come to a solution the other way when it comes to road issues. However, I am at a point where I think I would be happy to propose this to the committee with one additional condition, that's the word, thank you, sorry, it went straight out of my head, which is I think that the Residents' Association's request for meaningful communication through the next stages of the application is a valid one that is supported by our own policies. So some form of a condition where the town and the parish and the Residents' Association can have a method of communication with the developers, whoever they happen to be, conditioned in. That's my only request for that, but otherwise happy to propose.
Thank you, Councillor London. Is that seconded, please? Councillor Hood, would you like to speak again, Councillor Hood? Thank you. Okay. Right. Councillor Neil, please. Having invited you back in, it's your turn.
Thanks very much, Chair. A question for Dave, really. Within the local plan, there's an allocation of 120 houses, which is, you've justified it becoming 160. So it concerns me how 120 was there in the first place when we're creating our local plan. Why are they not looking at it the way you're looking at it, Dave, from your perspective? Because potentially anything from the local plan that hasn't come before committee has got the potential of a 30% increase. So that concerns me. Councillor Thorndike made some valid points about the railway and the proximity of the houses to the railway, the noise and the vibration. Should those houses need to be taken further away, a buffer created as such, is there then still room for the 160, or would that number then be reduced because we've had to create this buffer? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Neil. Councillor Holder, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. I was just waiting for somebody to propose, otherwise I was going to come and do that. However, now I've got a chance, I'll have a little word. And I thank the officers for their extensive report and the report that we've got here. And it's just mind-boggling the amount of consultees that are in this and the answers that developers and ourselves have to give to them. So it's a lot of work. Some of it which is incredibly expensive and probably unnecessary. But there we go. If we read in the national press, I'm sure Network Rail have got a big problem with these small crossovers, pedestrians and farm traffic. Hardly a harvest seasons go by before some tractor or trailer or combine harvest is totaled by a train, causing mayhem in that area, and they know they've got to do something about it. If you're increasing pedestrian traffic, obviously that is asking for trouble. And I just cannot think of a a year that goes by where somebody, I was going to use some rude words, somebody gets onto the railways and gets totaled by a train. The trespassing on the railway system is incredibly stupid, but happens all the time. We see the videos of people trying to run across lit, manned, level crossings when a train's coming to see if they can get to the other side quickly. And sometimes make it, sometimes don't. But I think Network Rail will have to do something about this before much longer, and I'm sure there's lots of other crossings they're looking at as we speak. The plans we've seen on the accidents around about, I really appreciate how low it is in and around Bury St Edmunds and this particular area, so that was good. Also, what was good is the plan showing the sangs and the suds and the open space on this development. And think back not that long when most of that site would be houses and very little green space, no provision for play, no provision for nature. And I commend the people who make the rules and regulations for putting them in place. It may trip people up, but it gives a nice, and it says in here, you know, it's a place setting, and people like to live there. So I commend the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Holder. Just give me one moment. Okay, so go back to officers now to answer some questions and.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the further notes that I've made, Councillor Waldron, just to reassure, we have the Suffolk Advisory Parking Standards adopted, of which any reserve matters will be expected to satisfy, which does include substantially larger parking spaces than perhaps traditionally have been provided, and also includes for larger garage spaces, particularly where those garages are expecting also to provide for cycle storage. I think Councillor Neil raised a couple of points as well, and what was the justification at the outset for these sites being, or this site being proposed for 120? Ultimately, it was to embed some flexibility. It was to take a precautionary approach to the number of dwellings that was likely to be capable of being provided on sites of this nature. And of course, importantly, it was to reflect the very fundamental requirement for suitable alternative natural green space as part of the mechanism that the authority has brought forward under this new local plan in order to offset the recreational effects on development. From that point, it is a starting point, not an end point. And as I have explained, and I will do so briefly again, it is making sure in all cases that the very important requirements of the policies are all provided, and that what is then left at the end of that process is the space that is left to provide dwellings rather than the other way around. And that's what's very important and is a step change in terms of the policies we've got before us. It does offer some inherent flexibility. There is a balance, there is a benefit, of course. We all want to provide effective use of the very finite resource that we've got, and providing more homes means they don't have to be provided on other sites. We are, of course, about to start a review of our local plan. We are all aware of the challenges and the expectations of housing delivery. So, again, it is a balance. Absolutely, it is a balance. But what it shouldn't be ever at the expense of is an appropriate satisfactory layout, acceptable standards of amenity, and that is all a matter that will come at the reserve matter stage. And again, just to make the further point, Councillor Neil, if the houses do need to be moved further away from the rail line in order to provide an acceptable noise environment, that will either increase the density, which may or may not be acceptable, or it will lead to a reduction in numbers. That is a reserve matter ultimately that will be for consideration at that stage, but it is just as likely that there will be fewer dwellings provided if they need to be further back from the rail line. Doesn't mean they'll have to be squeezed into a smaller area.
Just before we continue with the debate, or indeed move to a vote on the proposal, Councillor London, in your proposal you included an additional condition relating to the applicant or future applicant and developer working with the local community, having a community liaison group. In terms of planning conditions, as you know, they're very strict legal tests in terms of what we can put as a condition. I don't think that would necessarily meet the tests. However, I know we have in the past and could do in this case add a suitably worded informative as part of a decision notice. It is a formal way of bringing to attention of the person who holds that permission what is expected of them. So it's some of our other authorities, like the Highway Authority, bring to their attention other legal requirements that may be outside the planning process that are pertinent to them to know. And it is a way for us as a local authority to set out clearly what our expectations are in terms of that engagement or setting up of a community liaison group. So I just wanted to put that, if you could, yeah, you're happy with that. Okay, brilliant, thank you.
Thank you, Benny, and thank you, Councillor London, for accepting an informative. I've got no one on the committee wishing to contribute further to debate, so I'm going to swiftly move to the motion, which was proposed by Councillor London for approval in line with the officer's recommendation. It was seconded by Councillor Hood. So can I see a show of hands in favour, please, of approving the application?
Thank you. That appears to be unanimous. The motion is carried and the application is approved.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, committee. I just got a couple of small points when the room is empty just to bring to your attention. Okay.